Well, you've heard the statement, your truth, my truth. But what is truth? That's what Pilate asked Jesus.
You were listening to Wealth Talks, and today we have a special guest on the line for you, Krish Dhanam. Used to be the right-hand man to Zig Ziglar. He came to America from India with $9 in his pocket in the 90s. And since then, he has become the vice president of a global firm, and he has worked in several other roles as well. You will love hearing from Krish Dhanam. As always, welcome to the show, Krish.
Thanks a lot for having me, guys. It's always a joy to be with you and to chat with you.
Yes, it is a pleasure here as well. We're looking forward to have you on the Wealth Cruise later this year, Krish. It's coming up here October 19th and through the 26th. We'll be cruising through the Eastern Caribbean. We're going to give people a preview of what that cruise is going to look like, some of the things that we'll be sharing on there today, and we're looking forward to get that preview and to hear a little bit of what we're going to get to experience on the cruise.
Awesome.
Well, you heard the tagline, Krish, that your truth, my truth, what is truth? That seems to be a really common thing happening in our society today. And then what happens is, how do you know what the truth is? Because if your truth is just as good as my truth, where can we come into an agreement together?
Well, obviously, I think in the intro we had talked about it. In a Judeo-Christian worldview, that the question of truth, with Pilate asking Jesus that question and the Jesus' response, even if you step away from theology, what we are seeing is a fascinating shift in our cultural sands. Truth by nature, according to Christian apologist Ravi Zacharias, is exclusive. Every worldview claims it has its version of truth. And if the version of truth that people believe is something that is created by man, judged by man, approved by man, and applauded by man, then that truth can shift over a period of time. One of the latest things is redefining what is true for people means you redefine the norm. But if you go back to the exclusivity of truth, that something had to have existed before us that gives us our moral conscience, then that's a different version of how we would look at truth. So the exclusivity of truth is, I think, what is the biggest challenge, not as much the different versions of it, because the moment you go into the exclusivity of truth, it narrows down very, very rapidly that a moral law has to come from a moral lawgiver. And other than that, everything is man-made, and we keep, shifting the definitions.
So you hinted at something, and that was, currently we're having the struggle between what is truth. Pilate certainly had that. So when did we drift away from what would be considered the truth or from a moral lawgiver?
Yeah, my late mentor Zig Ziglar used to do quoted one time, and I think he got this from someone else. But they said by the middle 1950s, the Thomas Jefferson Research Institute was gauging morality in American education, and they said it had become so minuscule that it was not even worth measuring as a quantity. So right after that came the free love movement of the 60s, and then we had the Vietnam War and all of that fallout post that. So we are now probably good biblical generation plus. I'm thinking about 60 years we have seen this shift, where now what was right and wrong is no longer debated on a moral, it's always debated on justice. And justice is always judges, and it always comes down to humanity. So what happens is we are now seeing a complete vacuum of anything that can be considered an absolute, and everything is considered an abstract that can be redefined by man by their individual flowering of thought. They call it progress, but C.S. Lewis probably articulated it best. He says what they are articulating as progress may actually be humanity's regress.
So I was reading a book the other day by a former FBI negotiator that negotiated with hostages and that terrorists that had taken hostages and whatnot around the world. And he was saying that really what everybody is looking for is fairness. And you said justice, how everything. Is there a difference between justice and fairness, Krish?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I've asked this question globally over the last 2.5 decades. Do you want fairness or do you want equality? And 100% of the people respond fairness, which means I just want to be able to play the game, don't need to change the rules for me. I will come with whatever skill set I have that kind of governs the rules you already have in play. And fairness was what we need. But fascinating, the other issue of justice, it's doled out on the measure of equality. 100% of our laws seem to be about equality when 100% of the desire is about fairness. So in equality, what we are saying is, I want you to judge the game differently. I want you to change the rules so that I can win. So no longer is skill and entrepreneurship and desire and effort and efficiency even a benchmark. It is, hey, level the playing field so that everybody can win. And as a result, achievement now is frowned upon and participation is considered achievement, whereas it's backwards. Participation can never be achievement. Participation is just you're playing the game. There has to be a winner and a loser for it to make sense.
Yes, that's so true.
Yeah, and a lot of people will quote you mentioned earlier that people call, or the redefinition of these truths, they call it progress, when it may actually be regress. And oftentimes they'll quote science to back it up. The science is the truth that lays the foundation for all of this. I really appreciate what John Lennox talks about in his book, Can Science Explain Everything?, where he talks about that science is simply the investigation of the world around us. It really cannot have any truth of its own accord. Can you speak to that a little bit and how that?
Yeah, and I think, having heard Dr. Lennox in Oxford at a couple of lectures, he brings a very, very interesting perspective where he says, we can always explain the mechanism of what science can explain the mechanism of gravity. It may be even able to explain the method in which gravity works, but science can never explain the agency of why we have gravity in the first place. We've taken the mechanism and we've taken the method, and with pinpoint accuracy, we put a man on the moon where the gravitational forces are different in comparison to Earth. But he said we can never explain why we have gravity to begin with. So the whole concept of agency is the prescription in some way, and people don't want to talk about agency because that again goes outside dimension. We want to be able to comprehend what is within us, and as a result, we only want to talk about tools, mechanisms, and methods, but we don't want to ask ourselves why these things exist. And that's what Lennox says. He says that, we can always explain the how, we can explain the what, we can explain the where, but science cannot explain why, because that agency, why does it exist? Why does that phenomenon exist? Why is it even capable of being discovered? But going back to that, if science has definitely proven everything, I think it was Lennox himself who said, science needs ethics to survive. Ethics doesn't need science to survive.
That's really interesting. So many different industries are trying to regulate ethics today. And it's not really something you can regulate because it comes from our heart.
Yeah, and I think in the pre-show thing, we talked about the word relativism. And relativism, we now live in what everybody is articulating as a post-truth culture. And post-truth, they're trying to give some great postmodern physiological and psychological definitions. But in the digital age we live in, basically what anybody posts is truth. So they're just, everybody is just like, okay, I got to post, and if I get more likes than the other person and I go viral, then somehow that's truth. If that's the case, the lady who wore a Chewbacca mask is the one who should be actually saving civilization. She got a gazillion likes on her YouTube.
So this brings up another question when we're talking about truth and morality and judgment and fairness, and that is responsibility. If my truth is just as good as anybody else's truth, who am I responsible to?
And that's the word that has been disbanded from the lexicon, and I think it's almost a global phenomenon across the way. And responsibility. Adrian Rogers once put it this way. He says, "You raise a generation based on rights, and all you'll have is a revolution. If you go back to raise them on responsibility, we may have a revival." And responsibility is responsibility to, responsibility for, and responsibility by. Anytime you take on the onus of responsibility, there's a tradition that's attached to it, there is an obligation attached to it, experience attached to it. But if you just go by rights, it's an individual flowering of thought. People say, in apologetics, we say you arrive at this point of autonomy, or, auto meaning self and nomos meaning law, which means law has to revolve around me. Mm-hmm. In fact, that's why I think Ravi pointed out one time when he says, no law has ever been written to protect the people. It's always been written in some way to enforce or protect the previous law.
There's a lot of truth to that.
So we find this coming to a kind of a nexus when we work with people around the globe and in their finances. They haven't taken the responsibility to manage what has been provided to them, and so they want to look at who's to blame for that, but they never want to look inwardly. And it just seems that there's a huge connection between the way that our society has shifted away from the truth to this lack of responsibility is why there's more people maybe suffering financially than they should.
Yeah, and part of it is, there are three components that are portrayed out, and one is when you guys do financial wealth planning and you do all of the advice you give them to protect them, the insurance components and all that, part of your solution comes from tradition, saying, hey, you know what? This has always worked. It protects the nest egg. You need to save for a rainy day. That's biblical times. Whether it was in the Pharaoh's court or whatever, when they said, hey, we're going to have 7 years of famine, so we need to store up our grain. These are just realities. Mm-hmm. Part of it is some things are given, some things are uncontrollable, and you need to plan for the uncontrollable the best way you know how. But that's part of tradition. What we are living in right now is what is called an existential time frame. People are now trying to create a utopia that doesn't exist to take care of problems they know they do exist for a future they're claiming will not exist. so we're living.
Can you say that again? Can you say that again?
I don't know if I can, but they're asking for reversing of solutions for problems they do know exist in a time where they just they believe those problems should go away, whether it's student loan or whatever. Mm-hmm. At the same time, they're saying we don't have a future because climate change, where it's all going to end. Mm. So what are we worried about? If we're the only thing we really have is tradition. So the three components are: the traditionalist is more worried about what he learned yesterday, and that becomes a good foundation. So some people say traditionalists are archaic. The existentialist says, I really don't care about tomorrow, and I was not born yesterday, so I'm going to live in today, pie in the sky. And then the utopian says the future will take care of itself. I don't even know if I'm going to be there. Mm-hmm. But in reality, we need all three. Mr. Ziegler, who was the wisest man I ever knew, was always said, you can either let your past beat you or you can let it teach you, which mm-hmm. means the past has always got to teach us lessons. The present is where we solidify them, and the future is where the learning from those lessons will be revealed if you did them right.
Yeah, that's good.
So how do we work and help people define what truth is in their life today?
I think you can come at it from two perspectives. One is subjective and the other is objective. And this goes back to Logic 101. There is some truth that is based on fact. And these are just these are non-negotiable truths. These are truths that have existed before time. They'll exist after time. And that, again, for those of us who believe in that objective truth, whether it comes from a moral law, a moral lawgiver, whether we believe in the creation and all of the things that we do believe in, it solidifies that objective truth. Some things are right, some things are wrong, some things are good, some things are bad, some things are black, some things are white. But what we are also experiencing now is a subjective truth, which means my heart believes it to be true. My mind is now going to be convinced that it's true. You better like what I'm thinking and feeling, and you better legislate it, and you better applaud it. So we're creating a sequence now where subjective truth is becoming the law of the land because it comes out of feelings and not facts. And so when I'm doing corporate consulting and all that, people say, what's the one litmus test you look for of the real quality in a person? I said, if I ask a question and they say, let me think about it, I pay attention because I know this person is going to come at it and with some kind of quantitative truth. But if they say, well, I feel, then I know it's a qualitative, merry-go-round because it's circular logic. So I think those two issues are true in the sense that there is a part of this world that operates in objective truth, but I think more of the world is now starting to subscribe to subjective truth, which is it starts with feelings and is not really based on facts, and legislation actually is happening based on what was felt.
That's true. Recently, we were informed of a surgeon who based his decisions on what the patient felt rather than on the objective findings of the X-ray or CAT scan. And that just goes completely against everything I was taught in healthcare because now you're treating symptoms rather than the cause of the problem. And years ago, I remember there was a saying, emotions, do they have me or do I have them? And I think, are emotions just the way that we think, or are they something that really are derived out of some thought process or part of our brain that we're really not cognitively aware of?
I think, unfortunately, a majority of what we do is built on emotion, but we pretend to be logical. So actually, the guys who are talking about feelings are right in the sense that we have to have a moral thing, but you can't legislate those feelings because everybody else has a different set of them. They come from a different qualifying source. But you're right on one thing, and that is this whole concept of my emotions are going to when I set some of my first goals, they were logically set because I wanted something more, but when they were achieved, they were emotionally achieved because you actually look at something you've accomplished and believe that, a logical process delivered this to you. And it's okay to shed a tear of joy or gratitude. When a child is born, we are emotional. But every part of that child's birth was a very logical outcome. Nothing happened by feelings. They were actual, it's like, so when, and I think Ben Shapiro, a guy that you probably listen to as well, said this, I think in one of the things he says, for example, society now, their new truth is they call it an accidental pregnancy when there was no part of any of that journey that was an accident.
Yeah.
So, when you look at it as adults and when we talk at it, and this is the thing I'm finding out. The moment you get into logic as it pertains to a human being, the defense mechanisms of emotion are different. So a logician is emotionally positive. A person who doesn't think logically and just wants to act random on just purely on feelings, their emotion tends to be reactionary. So maybe this is a good formula, which I just thought, in my head, it's just coming together. A logician's emotions are proactive responses. A feeling practitioner, their emotion is a reactive response.
So
that's good.
We've been talking a lot about what's happening in our culture. You traveled the world. You've been to I don't know how many countries. And what do you see happening in other cultures, Krish?
there is one side of it that has stopped copying the West. People don't copy the Western morals anymore because they kind of realize that is sinking sand. Because at some point it has, the other cultures of the world that I travel in, especially my native homeland and Southeast Asia and all, tradition and family values are still strong. And when you go into this absolute narcissistic behavior that I'm the most important person on planet Earth and nobody can tell me how to live, and every belief and every feeling I have is up to my own interpretation, some of the other cultures resist that because the family component is still very, very big. Honor, duty. My dad and I subscribe to different worldviews, but there are certain lines I won't cross with him because he's my father and that's how I was raised. Mm-hmm. Whereas with my own offspring, I see that challenge sometimes made because he was raised in a different culture. So one of the things I'm seeing in that is, okay, hey, maybe the West is kind of morally bankrupt, so let's just look at it for advice on science, advice on wealth, and advice on some of the things, but let's not take, issues of relationships from them, which is tragic because when you go back to the 40s and the 50s and you saw some of the heroes who shaped this country, they were great role models all over the world. I remember when my brother met John Kenneth Galbraith, who was an economist who came to India as an ambassador. Crowds lined up just to shake hands with a man who was an economic powerhouse, who had now come to India as an ambassador. When Edmund Hillary, the guy who climbed Everest, became New Zealand's High Commissioner to India, people flocked around him because they saw a hero who was an adventurer but came from humble beginnings. So I don't think American heroes are any more that lauded around the world. Most of the people lauded around the world are American billionaires, and they just look at them for capitalistic advice. So,
how different that mindset is than the headline I read this morning, where this the ladies' soccer team, the lady that's been outspoken so much about equal pay and everything, said her father needs treatment because he voted different than she did.
As far as the sport is concerned, I think they did well to win it, but a lot of what she says is just headline grabbing, because there was another YouTube clip of hers that surfaced. I think she was at some award ceremony and a young kid walked up to her with a football or soccer ball, whatever they call it, and asked for a signature, and she didn't even make eye contact with the kid. And on the other side, you look. So the ability to articulate what you feel is one thing. I've been in this business a long time, but I love the definition of character that was given to me very early. It says character is the ability to have pride in the mundane. The mundane is always practice. So if you're a superb athlete, you need to show excellence when you practice if you want people to revere you when you perform. And so other than that, statements that they make about trying to everything is a cause. Nothing can just be, hey, just score a goal. Just like, why is everything a cause? Like the other guy who got like a bronze medal in fencing decided to kneel down. And I'm thinking, of all the things in this world that I care about, including the national anthem and standing for the flag, the thing that was never on my radar, even in my wildest dreams, was I wonder what a bronze medalist fencer's opinions are about life. So I think some people would just look at that and say, oh my God, she's such a role model. But, if you're a role model, you just need to ask yourself in the mirror. And I always ask myself this. When I put my head on the pillow at night, I don't think of the change I made. I ask myself, is someone glad I passed their way? Or is everybody glad I just got out of their way?
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the financial effects of this type of thinking that we've been talking about and how we see it applied in the financial world today. A lot of people are coming to us and they see all of the different options. There's different ways that you can choose to manage your finances, right? You could choose to go high risk, and people tend to think high risk, high rewards. As part of that, well, the risk is also there that you could lose it. The other option is to start with a guaranteed foundation, which is what we do with the life insurance. We're starting with a guaranteed foundation here, and people want to compare these two paths like they are different truths, that they can pick between one and the other subjectively. When what I hear you saying, Krish, is we really need to be objective in these type of choices. Feelings do have a role, but we have to base we have to base our actions upon logic first. Is that right?
Absolutely, and the data on that doesn't lie, but we can actually use this illustration differently when you looked at the word foundation. Recently, I heard a story about a guy who goes to a town, and they say that this is the town where we have the first postmodern building here. So what's a postmodern building? Well, it's kind of built on a structure of no real relevance. It has no purpose. There are rooms that don't serve any identity. There are stairs that don't go anywhere. There are windows that don't open. There are closets that are non-functional. But it was basically a building that was left up to the artist's interpretation and imagination. So it was constructed, and it's considered, I think somewhere in Ohio, it's considered one of the world's first postmodern buildings that celebrated form over function. And the person who was being shown this building said, "Is there a foundation to this building?"
That's good.
With the foundation, you can be ambitious. You can say that, okay, I want part of my portfolio to spread my dog's ashes in the Newfoundland Bay.
Certainly.
But if you have the foundation and you've achieved that, then go for it.
There you go.
If you don't have the foundation, then everything is that's maybe the reality of this explaining that truth is when you get into the retirement and there is no income and you have to rely on that which you have amassed and that which you have saved, at that point, are you looking for form or you're looking for function?
For function, certainly. You want that foundation there. Absolutely.
So I think that's the best way I explain foundation, because I can take an architect to any place in the world and show them a hole in the ground, and they'll tell me how tall the building's going to be, and they're not putting their expertise on the fact of the materials or the construction crew or the ambition of the builder. They're looking at the hole, saying, hey, with that foundation, it can be 10, 15, 20, 100 stories tall. So without a foundation, everything collapses. And in financial planning, the foundation is the most critical. The risk-reward ratio is up to the individual and their tolerance, but more importantly, with the amount of discretionary income. But at the end of the day, I tell people that I said, one kind of thinking feeds your family, the other kind feeds your ego.
We like to call that our loss tolerance rather than our risk tolerance, because when you sit down, you have the absolute. This is going to cost you $5,000 instead of what might you possibly gain from investing $5,000. It puts a little in a different perspective.
Sure, and it's how much interest can you generate on money you almost saved?
Zero every time. It works every time.
And sometimes it's the whole seductive nature of not being logical and just being emotional boils down to the old law of non-contradiction, which is, hey, I don't want an either-or scenario. It's very limiting. It's toxic to my thought process, where I'm an evolved person and you seem very structured. I don't want an either-or option. I want an and-also option. And the reverse logic, I always look at them as I saying, so what you're saying is you want an and also. You either want an and also or nothing. The either or always prevails. So most people, if you peel, the old analogy, they like peeling the onion thinking they're going to get a diamond. They just get tears.
Yeah, and with what you're saying about the risk reward and all of this, if we start with the foundation, then we can have both. But we do have to start with that either or and build the foundation first, or we have nothing to build upon. That's really.
Yeah, and that's so. What happens is one gives you the other option, the other gives you no option.
Exactly.
That's exactly right. We talk about that as having both in our philosophy. If you lay the foundation right, you will get both eventually. But if you start out with the higher risk, the chances of you having both are less. Yeah.
Right, and I think, Tom, you mentioned the word is the way I teach it. When yesterday, in fact, Dave was speaking for a big corporation, and I said, when you're building your brand, this is on the individual side. A calculated risk comes with advice and expertise. So you trust the people who have either blazed the path before you, are experts within that field, or people who you can lean on because their counsel is something you trust. A calculated risk usually includes some of those components, and then what happens is there may be a downside, but it's decided up front that, okay, this may be the downside, but we'll head it off. But there's a strategy in place.
Yes.
A gamble is just throwing caution to the wind and hoping that you get. So sometimes a gamble has an incredible return, but the number of people who have to lose for a gamble to work is far greater than the number of people you have to trust for a calculated risk to work.
That is so true. So let's back up and take a look at the big picture again. Why do we even have this discussion? Why does it really matter? Has this thought process that we're living through right now happened in the past? Can we see examples of it in the Roman Empire or maybe the Greeks or something in the past? What happens to society if we don't come to grips with this and face reality?
Well, I think it has happened many, many times in the past, different civilizations. And in fact, one of the seminal works on that was a book called Sex and the Culture by J.D. Unwin, a British anthropologist. And I think he studied like 80 people groups and 5 or 6 different civilizations all the way back to Greece and Mesopotamia. And he said most of the people who went down this moral decline, redefining morality, changing objective truth, within 4 generations ceased to be a superpower. Mm-hmm. Rome was never conquered. It succumbed to its own debauchery. The Ottoman Empire fell by the same wayside because at some point a boundaryless living starts eroding at the foundation. The further you go away from the epicenter of your power, the less strong you are. And at some point, someone else will unseat you. America is, ironically, about 2.5, maybe close to 3 generations or 3 cycles from that. When you look at our success post-World War II, there was a time when, roughly 70% of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies were people who came out of World War II. Now, these guys went there as kids, 17, 18, some lying about their age so they could be loyal to their nation, and came back, defined strong men who ran huge companies. We don't make them like that anymore because we've not been tested that way anymore. So we're about 2.5 generations where we have redefined everything. It's free love, it's free this, it's free that. And I think the reason we have to have this conversation is we don't need to go that far back in history to see what just absolute mayhem can come as a result of this. Praying that it doesn't happen in our lifetime, but it was in our lifetime. We had the famine or right before our lifetime, we had the famine in China. Mm-hmm. These things are catastrophic when singular ideologies without God at the center just kind of run rampant. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's one of the reasons we're looking forward to have you on the cruise. You're going to be sharing some of this thought process with everyone on the cruise, won't you?
Yeah, I've actually documented stuff. It's just called Study of Worldviews. And what I do is I obviously come from a Judeo-Christian perspective, but I don't take that bench. I basically explain all the other worldviews from pluralism to scientism to Buddhism, Hinduism, pantheism, panentheism, And people say, what's the difference? Pantheism, you have multiple gods, and in panentheism, one of those multiple gods is better, like Zeus was in Greece. And, you go through that. And people realize that there is actually a great fascination in understanding that. None of us realize how our thoughts are shaped. But when Orwell wrote the book 1984 and 1948, and he predicted those 3 moods, one of the moods he said was we'll arrive in a future where ignorance will be strength. Mm-hmm. And hopefully through some of this learning, we'll realize that maybe we need to challenge some of the ignorance out there. And the only way we can do that is understand what other people are thinking. So I've done this exhaustively over a period of time. I subscribe to one worldview, but I've never been jaded and prejudiced by not studying others. So I've read all the other holy books. And so I think it'll be a fun time because it'll be an objective discussion. There won't be an agenda there. Mm-hmm. But what it will do is allow me to be asked questions by those who may subscribe to a different thing, and then hopefully bring clarity so that, we can, at the end of the day, run our families peacefully and probably, plan for our finances measurably.
Absolutely, that is the goal. You're going to be bringing a wonderful perspective to the information we're going to be sharing on managing finances and building wealth for your family and for the future. This is going to be wonderful. Such a great fit.
Well, Krish, as always, it's so good to just be able to spend some time to talk. And even if we were broadcasting today, it's still just a talk like we have when we get together. I always just enjoy those times so much together. As the scripture says, iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another, and it's good to spend time with you.
Absolutely. Always learn something new in talking with you.
Well, thanks a lot. I appreciate the friendship over the years, and I'm really looking forward to when my bride and I can both sit at the dining table of your house at the same time.
Yes, that'll be wonderful. We'll have to make that happen soon.
Yeah, we've done it at different times, and both came back and raved about it, and now we need to convince each other to do it together.
All right. Very good. Well, we'll get some time like that on the cruise, and then we'll look forward to the future as well. So for those of you who want to join us on the Wealth Cruise coming up October 19th through the 26th, be sure to check out the resource link or give our office a call at 702-660-7000. We'll get you the information to get your cruise cabin booked right away while there's still room on the cruise ship. We are running short on that time, so be sure to contact us or use that resource link. Get in contact with Anila, who's Krish's wife. She's handling the booking for the cruise, and we'll make sure you get your cabin on the cruise. You can join us in the Eastern Caribbean October 19th through the 26th. This is going to be such a great time. Krish, any last words you have for the...
No, I just want to echo the fact, for those of you who have been listeners to Wealth Benefits and the podcast and all of the information that Tom and the rest of the McPhee team give, this will be a very unique opportunity because unlike other seminars that we have done together and that they have done for you, not only do we get to learn when we are at sea, but we get to play when we are on land. So we get to spend each other's time and then dissect the information firsthand, plus also get a little more personal in each other's lives and build some friendships. So I'm really looking forward to the opportunity, the privilege. And for those of you who are joining us, we can't wait to see you. For those of you who are still wondering, please do join us.
All right, you are listening to Wealth Talks, where we talk about solutions, money, and other things that create wealth in your life. Have a great week.